Hello and welcome to JavaScript Marathon Training presented by This.Labs. I'm Sarah with This.Labs and I will be your host. Our next session is integrating live data in your static site with Eleventy. Happy to announce our trainer today is Kyle Mitofsky, Senior Software Engineer at This. Welcome, Kyle.
Thanks.
You can find Kyle on Twitter using the handle shown at the bottom of this screen. Please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions or feedback about the session. JavaScript Marathon would not be possible without our sponsors. Our sponsor today is This.Labs, your partners in modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. Find out more at this.labs.com. This.Labs offers personalized training programs to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. If you find keeping up with constantly evolving technologies a struggle and want to bring your team up to speed on one of the latest technologies, contact us today at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. Check out these upcoming special events. We're rounding out the year of 2020 with our last Global View meetup featuring our very own CEO, Tracy Lee, and Mike Hardington. More details are available at this.co. We also have monthly mentoring coming back January 20th and a Global View meetup State of View January 21st, 2021. Last but not least, JavaScript Marathon will return Wednesday, January 20th. Follow us on This.Labs on Twitter for more details. And with that, I will hand the keys over officially to Kyle.
Cool. Thanks, Sarah. All right, keys are all mine. So I'm super excited to be doing part 2 of something we started last month. I hope there's some repeat subscribers who are tuning in for the second time. I won't linger too long on what we already did. There's a video up on covering that whole content, but I will kind of recalibrate, set the stage for what we want to accomplish today. So, and I'm also checking our comments too. We posted the comment, feel free to drop questions live as we go, and I'll try to get to them and bring them up. And maybe there will be some time for questions at the end, but certainly if something's on your mind, bring it up. There's a little bit of a lag, so if I don't get to you right away, that's probably why. So everything we did last month is in the repo that we created on GitHub. It's on JS-Marathon/-Eleventy. And we also pushed it up to Netlify. So there is little starter page, starter site, and we have a couple different pages here. And importantly, there's not a lot of content on the pages. This isn't a content talk. This is kind of getting plumbing and wiring and structure to the site. But you can put in your own content here. The important part is we have a layout page, we have some styles, we have all that stuff coming in. And the content for stuff is relatively, when we look at what's on the index page, it's just this. It's not very much. And all that is driving what we see on this home screen. If we look at contact, it's just this markdown file. And that's one of the things Eleventy is bringing, is taking content, running it through a process, building a static site at the end of that. So that's hopefully why we're here. Hopefully you have some familiarity. If not, go back, watch the last one, and we'll bring you up to speed. A couple other links I have in here. I kind of fleshed out some of the README from what we accomplished last time. Some good links to have kind of at our disposal for this project. We're using Eleventy. I'll reference it live as we're going through stuff, so you have some context for if you see me throwing a whole bunch of code on, it's probably from the docs. They're pretty darn good. We're also going to be using Nungex for our templating language, and then some kind of core requirements. You need Node for this. We're pushing over Netlify and using GitHub. Those aren't required for the project, but I'd recommend them. They're good. And here's some of what we did. I won't go over that, but it's available if you want to peruse. That's all available on GitHub. I don't know if I'm going to post this comment for Sarah to leave, post the link for Sarah to leave in the chat if you want to follow along with what we have. let me jump into our project. There's the README. Here are all the files that we have so far. And where last we left our heroes, we just kind of thrown together this data example of I have a global data directory. There are the name of my 3 cats in that data directory because I try to put them into every presentation. And we kind of done a very quick pass at dumping them out onto the page somewhere. I cleaned that up and I can show you what that looks like again. As soon as we have properties that are available, this is part of something Eleventy calls the global data cascade. And I just want to point you to the docs on that too while we're looking at it. Okay, so the global data cascade goes all the way from, we have global data files, which is what we're poking at when we have cats.json. There's also front matter data that we've looked at in the actual layouts themselves. And there are a couple other, we can have directory data files, we can have template data files. They can be in the layouts, and there's a couple of different places we can put front matter. So all of that data is smushed together and flattened and all going to be available at the point in time that we're rendering something. So an example of that data is there's now a data field that's available for us to render called title. That data comes in as the string. That's all part of front matter for this particular page. And so when we say, hey, go render using default layout, we can inject that data into default layout. At the same time, if we wanted to inject data from cats, they're both equally available. By the time we're rendering, the data cascade has been smushed, and if it's available, it will be available. So if I wanted to put all my cats info right here, we could take that cats object. This is nunjux, which is kind of handlebarsy syntax, and I can put cats in here. Of course, that's an array, and one thing we did really quick last time is there are some filter operators on here. And so one way that we can just quickly look at this data for diagnosing, debugging it, is putting that dump filter on it, which takes and bundles it into an object. And so if we save all that, I have Eleventy running in the background. And we'll go to our local site, and we see that data here. We're going to do more interesting stuff with that data really quickly, but I just want to refresh where we were when talking about injecting data into the site. And soon we'll start hitting, throughout the rest of this talk, cool use cases for being able to do that. And I kind of want to move that discussion in 3 parts. So the first is we're just going to hard code data. This is actually what we've accomplished now. We're going to have a little bit better way to consume that data. The second stage of kind of getting data baked into the build pipeline for your site is to live pull it. So we're not going to hard code anything. We're not going to commit that file. We're going to say, hey, every time I build, I want to go fetch that API. I think stage 3 is where I like getting to and prefer getting to, is we can pull it anytime we want. But on every single build operation, I don't really want to pay the cost of hitting an API. You might have API bottlenecks. You might want to do local development on a train. You might just not want the spin up time of doing a live hit. And so we're going to pull that data, store it somewhere, cache it, and then use that data for building our site. So we'll go through those throughout the rest of the talk. So let's take a look at, here there is, there's a list of free APIs that I like doing for talks just to get real data without having to own your own backend. And one of them is the cat API. This follows the lineage of our current example as well. And so with the cat API, we can go grab tons of information about cats. Some of these are cute APIs that are freely available. This is robust. It has a ton of information on it. And so the route that I want to hit on this cat API is api.thecatapi.com v1/breeds, and then this lists all the breeds of cat available. And so when I say I want to hard code stuff, let's just take the output of this. We're not going to do anything sophisticated in our build. We're going to take that. We're going to put it in our global data file. On save, format it a little bit. That'll take a second because it's long. It's not important that it's formatted, but there we go. And let's scroll all the way to the top. And this is kind of what each one of these looks like. There's an array of objects. Each one of these objects contains information about a whole bunch of different cats. There are more breeds than I was aware of. And let's rename this file to breeds. Okay, so we have a global data file. If we go back to here, this data point isn't available anymore. So we didn't want this anyway. This was just kind of for diagnosing and debugging purposes. Let's remove that, but let's find a way to consume this data somewhere else on our site. We already have an index page, we have a contact page, we have an about page. Let's create a page for breeds of cats. And this is going to be a content page, so I'm going to call it Nunjux. Same way that these four are content pages. In the same way that about we said, hey, use this default layout, we have a title, let's borrow that syntax and put it here just to bootstrap this page. And this is going to be breeds of cats. And before we even put any information in here, let's just make sure all of that's wired up. On default, we have a list of links, and we can add one more to this. And this should be available. If you don't recall, what makes files available in Eleventy is the name of this just becomes the path that that file is hosted at. There's a way to override that by explicitly setting a permalink. But what will happen is breeds will get generated into the site as soon as we save, which we did, and that will create an index.html under this folder so the URL stays clean. We don't have to include this part, we just include the folder. So I'm going to include that into our default layout. We have an empty page that doesn't do anything yet to do add breeds of cats. And let's just make sure that that first wave of plumbing is live. We can go to our local site, we can see breeds, and we can see this. So typos aside, let's consume that data on here. The last way we consume data was just dumping it somewhere. That's not a super interesting way to do it. There's better ways we can consume data. We know it's available at least because of how we dumped this last time. This is the property that that data is available under, but let's do something more interesting with it. So we're not just going to inject that into the page. We're actually going to template it. And that's where Nunjux comes into play. So if I bounce the docs on Nunjux, these are also linked from the repo. We can see a whole bunch of docs API. And there should be a for loop in here. And in looking for docs for this, you know what? Templating. This is under templating, that API. I learned some cool stuff on the for loop. And I'll just point it out. Let me load this up so it's a little higher. This is a cool syntax. So normally, I'm used to seeing a for loop where it goes, item in items. Here's the syntax for iterating over something. And then we have an end for. What I learned last night in looking at this, there's an else block where if items.length is 0, then this would display if the item collection were empty. That's kind of a cool, terse way of if we need to have null handling for arrays for doing that inside of here. We'll just do the for item in items list because we know we have data here. But there's some cool stuff in this documentation. We can iterate over arrays or dictionaries. We have an array in this instance, which means each object inside of that array is going to be populated into here. If you are iterating over a dictionary like this, you can grab both the key and the value in that for loop. So let's just grab, roughly speaking, this, and then we'll go clean that up. Whoops. Let's get rid of our else block. Optimistically that we won't need it. We're going to say the item property that's available is breeds. And then we'll name whatever we want to put in here. And let's call that the singular version breed. And for properties that we want to list off of here, let's go back to here and see, well, here's all the properties that we have to work with. Let's just pull name out of there. So we'll come back to here. This is creating in each loop of this a list item. So we need some list UL around here. And that's all we're going to do. This should automatically inject the title. For breed and breeds should loop through every item in that collection. Let's save and see how this looks live. Okay, cool. So we have every single cat that's in this collection, and we just have a list of all the cats. That's a starting point for just taking any set of data if you want to scaffold it out onto a page. To be able to see that, there's more sophisticated stuff we can do with this, but as a starting point, that's pretty good. The next thing that we might want to do is there's a lot of information per cat. And let's say we want to scaffold out one page for every single cat. There's this concept in Eleventy called pagination. And so we can take the set of data that we have and paginate it across multiple pages. It's a way to, normally there's a one-to-one relationship between a content file and the output. And what pagination allows us to do is say, hey, start scaffolding out multiple pages based on the amount of data that's in here. We're going to create one page for each type of data that we have. And so how we're going to accomplish that is, let's go back into here and let's create another. So we have our kind of, usually when you're creating components, web components, any sort of thing, you have a list view and then you have your detail view of the individual items inside of that list. So list view, check, we have it here. If we want the detail view, we're going to paginate each of those components. If you're kind of new to static site generation is ahead of time building every single one of these pages so they're immediately available as soon as somebody requests a particular page per this particular ID. If you're coming from a server-generated land or a client-generated land, normally what happens in that route is you pass in an ID, it does a data query for, hey, what do you know about this particular animal? And then it templates it live, scaffolds it out, returns it to the client. One of the benefits to static site generation is ahead of time, we will compile every single one of these pages that could exist, generate all of them, happens asynchronously without the user having to wait for any of this to complete, and is all available at the moment the user requests it. So let's add our templated file. So we need one more of these content files to kick off the pagination. So I'm going to make one more. It's going to be breed singular. It could be breed detail. It could be something like that. .njk. I want to steal the layout at the very least. Let's say this is going to be breed detail. Layout just says, when you try to render this, don't just take the content, also inject it inside of our overall layout file inside of content. And so there is a command. If we jump back to the Eleventy docs, we can look at here. Inside of our front matter, we're going to say, hey, here's pagination. We can name the data that we want, and you can also inline your own data, as with this example. So here it's saying, well, let me create my own data in YAML. Here's the name of it. It's going to have 4 items. We are going to use the data from global data. Both are available to the pagination control. We're going to use that breed data that's in the JSON file. And so let's come over here. We'll say pagination, and that's going to come off of breeds. That has to match the name of the data that we have here. Under here, this takes a couple properties. So one is, pagination. Let me do this. Data is breeds. The size of this, if you were doing a blog, for example, and you wanted to paginate posts you had available, you might want 5 posts per page. You back up into the previous page, you back up into the previous page, and you show 5 of something. I kind of want to have, in this example, a detail page of every single individual cat. And so what I mean by size here of 1, it means only take one item from this array and use that and consider that per instance of the pagination what we're going to use. So here's breed. We have a size of 1, and we can also alias that. And so we'll say that when we want to reference the object inside of here, this is the same thing as like a, for breed in breeds. I want to grab just the individual object that's getting included in pagination. One thing we have to start doing, I had said, we can permalink stuff. Here, it's going to take, for breeds, it's just going to take that as the name. We could permalink it if we want to. Here, we kind of have to start doing that. And that's because it's going to generate a whole bunch of files. We need to tell it in each individual instance what URL to use. And so normally permalinks aren't the sort of thing that you can just inject data into in Eleventy in their build process. This is the one exception to that rule. So when we're generating permalinks on pagination, we can inject that data into there because we need to have it available. And so where I want this to be exposed from is breeds. And then we have access to this breed object. And that's too much copying. And if we look at the properties that are available, I'm going to go with the ID property of each one of these objects. We could also go with the name, but it feels like ID is more of the thing that I'd like to put in a canonical URL. Ultimately, it's not going to matter. It depends on what the cleanliness of that name data is coming in. So let's use breed.id. And then Eleventy will always create every file by default into an index.html. So this is a sufficient stopping point. It is important, for exaggerated effect, blow up on this. It is important that we include that last slash inside of the URL. And so just to kind of remind us that that needs to be there, I think it's a good practice to include the index.html, because then you're never going to omit that closing slash. This is really a folder. We're dumping the file into here. Okay, so now as we look at each one of these pages, this is going to paginate one page for each item in the array. And so we can grab properties from this data that is now available to this template. And so we should have stuff like breed.name. And that should be available. We could name it like this. If we want to, there's not always like a ton of use cases for this, but there's stuff that like allows us to match terms and their values. And somebody can drop this in the chat. Sarah, I don't know if we give away prizes or anything. I'll send you a high five on Twitter. But there's a DL, there's a DT, and then there's also a DD. And if somebody can name in chat what DT and DD stand for without looking it up, it'll be easy to solve that on MDN. But drop me a comment in chat if you know that, or look it up. Learning is fun. And if no one does it in a little bit, I'll circle back to it. So let's put name here. That's kind of a label for what's going inside of here. And we're going to drop name in here. And also, there's definitely a delay. But if anybody has stuff that they'd like to see from this list of available factoids we know about cat breeds now, let me know. We can know whether they're child-friendly, dog-friendly, what their energy level is, their grooming, their intelligence, their shedding level. This is detailed stuff. So if anybody has something they'd like to see, all of this information is available. We'll just grab a couple properties for now. So let's grab their temperament as well and put it into here. So here we'll take temperament. Here we'll take breed dot temperament and put it into here. Cool. So let's save this file. That should kick off. Right now, I don't think I've saved any of this yet. So if we look at what the output of Eleventy is, I'm running Eleventy with the serve option, which puts a watch on the files and continually reruns the process anytime you save. And so as soon as I save, we should kick this off again, and you'll see this got populated. And if I go in, it will say, hey, here we're writing all of these different files. The ID is always a 4-character abbreviation of those cats. It kind of looks clean in this mono-spaced console output. So we have all these files here. If we go on to, let's take a Bob as an example, and go to our site. Right now we have to navigate to this ourselves. We'll fix this in a moment, but just to prove that it's working, we can kind of see, hey, here's an American bobtail. We have intelligent, interactive, lively, playful, sensitive is their temperament. That's available to us. And let's fix one more thing inside of here as well, which is if we go into our list here, let's create links to each one of those pages that we created. So I can create a link element that's going to go inside of each of our list elements. We have a breed name, and then the href that we're pointing to. For a lot of this is something you get to accomplish if you only subdomain or root domain all of your properties. If you have whatever your domain is / whatever your product is / the rest of the path, this becomes more challenging. But we should be able to go root and then say, well, we're always going to be breeds, and then say breed.id is available to us, and then /. If we include the index.html here, it'll get printed in the browser. And so here we're just going to go directly to this. If we save this, we should get everything to regenerate. I'm going to go to breeds. And here's our list of cat breeds. Cool. So we can switch back and forth between these. Here are all the different breeds, and we can poke into each one of them. That's the lowest hanging fruit, or the first use case we have for just consuming globs of data within Eleventy. We have to do that first before we can kind of talk about more sophisticated stuff, but we're still on stage 1 of I have some hard-coded data, I'm committing it, I have to manually revision it. If something changed, I don't own this data. This is external data that I want to use at build time for this site. If any of that data changes, my site doesn't change until I rebuild it. And in this instance, rebuild it plus, go update this file itself. So what's a better way that we can handle that? And that's where I want to point us to stage 2, which is we can pull data live. One of the data sources that's available is a JSON file. Eleventy will read that. But Eleventy will also read JavaScript files. And once we're running JavaScript in a node environment, we have access to all of the other things that ecosystem provides for us. If we go to data, and this is going back to the docs on Eleventy, and we go to JavaScript data files, here's a couple different roughly equivalent syntaxes. These are all something you should expect to see if you're used to a node environment, which is whatever we want to kick out, whatever this expression is just going to be assigned to module.exports. We can have a fixed value here, and that value will be returned. We can run a function, and that function will be executed and then returned. And then we can even have stuff like async functions if we want. So let's go this async function route. And let me take this. I'm going to delete everything from here. We're going to take breeds.json. This is no longer a JSON file. This is a AS file. Okay. And we're going to do something like this. We have fetch breed data. I don't think we need to pass anything into here. In fact, I think we don't even need to name that function if we don't want to. So inside of here, we're going to go get read data and return that. If we want to look at how to accomplish that, one thing I like doing on Node is we will npm install node fetch. And that will make a fetch kind of syntax available within Node. For whatever reason, it's available natively in browsers. It's not available natively in Node. We'll use that. And so this is kind of pulling people into Node. This isn't a course specifically on that, but if you're new to that, that's a whole other set of kind of dependencies and requirements to go track down. But the boilerplate is we'll take and grab fetch from here and pull it in via a require statement, which we'll look at, which can pull from other files or anything we've installed. And so here we're going to grab node fetch. Oops, node fetch. Okay. And that makes this function available to us. So we are going to get the response from fetching. And here we can await that fetch. And then we're going to pipe in the URL that we want to go grab the data from. In this case, I just want to go grab the same URL we already hit. So I'm going to hit api.theCatAPI.com v1 breeds and go grab that. In this case also, and this is just the way fetch works, is we also have to get the JSON out of here by taking that response, awaiting that, and saying convert it also to JSON. The response at first just has header info, has other pieces of the Node API or the fetch API, and .json will take that, the body of that response, convert it into a JSON object for us. And from here, we can return that JSON. So when Eleventy now runs the data for the whole site as part of the global data cascade, it's still going to look in our _data file for anything that it wants to put under global data. Doesn't have to be a JSON. It can be a JavaScript file in this example, and it can go fetch live data. And just to kind of guarantee that we're proving it, site gets put as part of our git ignore because we want to rebuild the site every time. Eleventy doesn't actually clean out by default any old artifacts, build artifacts that it puts into the site. So let's delete that from here. Just to prove that on this next cycle that we're actually going to go get data from inside of here. So we've done a fetch, we've done a response JSON. If all that's looking good, then at this point in time when I hit breeds.js, the same information that was from that JSON file is going to be available where we want it for consumption inside of these files. That brings me to a tiny other piece that we didn't cover last time. I feel like it's worth covering as part of our evolving case of just kind of fleshing out what complete Eleventy setup is going to look like. And as part of Node, we have a package.json. We can run some scripts from here. We don't have any tests, so I'll get rid of that. But we can set up a couple run scripts, and that'll just help us remember what all the commands are to put into here. So we'll run two commands from here. One will be build, and that just runs Eleventy. We're not saving ourselves a whole bunch typing, but it is giving clarity to the project for people who come into it later. And one that's just going to be serve, and that runs Eleventy and also with the serve flag. Let me make sure I type that correctly. Cool. So we have two build scripts available. Let's run npm run serve, and that will run this command, and we should see it go scaffold out all of those different files, build them into sites where we have each one of these individual things, and then make those available. So we've kind of made an important pivot here, which is somewhere in the body of our repository, we are responsible for acquiring the data that we need to build this particular site. I think that's an important refactor from where we started, because I want this to be I want the cat API to be the canonical store of anything cat API related. I don't want to have to ever kind of do the work of copying stuff over. I want that to just go grab that data fresh every time. One challenge we run into is we have very little to fall back on if that fetch fails. So if something goes poorly in here, well, we're not going to do the build. The build will fail, and that's in some kind of static site land feature, not a bug of how static sites work. Because if it fails, it fails. It's never going to push up that failure onto and replace it onto the live site. We'll know about it ahead of time. We can go fix it, and then fix the build, push out a new instance that's going to go push live. That said, there are a whole bunch of other use cases where the cat API has rate limiting. You can sign up for a free dev account and get some API credentials. But that adds some complexity to things. Sometimes you might be hitting your own server or database or backend, and you're going to be paying for that transactional data. And so one thing we want to do, one ideal state we can get to is, hey, our build doesn't rely on doing this every single time. We can still bake into part of our process going and grabbing that fresh data, but not needing to do it on every single instance. And so that takes us to stage 3. I want to pull that data, I want to cache it out sort of somewhere, and then use it as part of our build process. So how can we do that? And this is kind of just a pattern I like sticking to. I've seen it elsewhere in the community. I try to present some idiomatic things that other people are also doing. So you kind of have some best practices. I think this counts as one of them. Sometimes there's a pattern of putting of actually caching these calls and just putting it in a cache folder and saying, well, I think I've seen this pattern before where there's a cache folder, and first it will go read from this folder on this live fetch, and then it won't have to do it. I think where it comes down to either legitimately caching stuff or going and fetching that data and just putting it into here depends on whether you want to check in that data in any way. But let's start with this. Let's add a utils folder, and let's put a script in here that's going to run some node code for us. So I'm going to call this getBreeds.js. This is just going to be a node function that does some work. It's going to kind of look like this, so I might seed it with, we're going to need node fetch at some point in time. We're going to do some of this work. I'm going to say that this is async function main, and then we'll actually invoke main. Okay, so we have kind of some scaffolding here. We're not returning anything. What we do and accomplish with this data is going to be go write the data to underscore data, and then we're going to go back to what we had in the first example, which is breeds.json. We're going to go build a JSON file with all of this data available in it. So let's do that. We can get the kind of output we want from saying there's a JSON method, and we can call stringify. We can pass the actual JSON that we have available and turn that into a string. We're going to need to do that in order to take the JSON object and stringify it into something that can be serialized into a file. Now we're just in Node land, so if you're familiar with a lot of Node APIs for doing file I/O, stuff like that, this should be familiar. If you're not, here's a little starter on that. We're already inside of an async function. If I can keep everything in my life async await, I think it just reads so much cleaner. So there's also inside of Node, we can pull in the FS, the file system library. And how I'm going to pull that in is a little bit of ES6 fancy feast footwork magic. There is a property on require FS called .promises. I could go grab that directly from here. as part of destructuring that, we can also alias it. And so here's the pattern that I like, which is go grab the promises property, make it available as FS, because I just want to treat the whole file system library as if it's async by default. And so every single time we want to do a file system operation, we're just going to use the FS thing, but we're only going to be using the subset of APIs that are asynchronous. Okay, so we have the output that we want. We can go take fs.writefile, and we have to pass it a path. Let's punt on that for a second and do that next. We have some data. That's just whatever we had in output. And then we have to pick an encoding type, and I'll pick UTF-8. Okay, so here's still a little more like node footwork to go get this path. We should have the current path available as __ dir name is what our current path is. Remember, we're in utils/getBreeds. So I want to go one layer up to get to my root folder, and then I want to go back down to get to the data folder. One way that we can combine paths in Node, let me collapse this so we have some more room. And there's half a dozen ways to do this, but one API available natively as part of Node is just the path API. And so we're going to take path, and let's get let root dir is going to equal path. We can call that API, and we can call join on here. And we can pass in a series of paths, and it will concatenate them together and give us the path that we want. So we're going to combine dir name and also then just this parent. We're going to go ... go to the parent directory. That'll give us our root dir. So when we have here, we're going to start with our root dir. And I have this extension in VS Code. I'll see if I can remember the name of it and point it out. But even if I'm on a double quote string and I want to turn this into a template literal, as soon as I type in $ quote, then it turns it into a template literal. How cool is that? Okay, so let's pass in root dir here. We're then going to say /_ data, and then whatever the file name we want is, and let's just call that breeds.json. We've come full circle to where we started on the hard-coded version, but now we've written a little script for ourselves to go grab that information. So we can delete breeds altogether. The way we invoke just a single node file at a time is inside of here. We can just hit node, which will run that file. And then this is under utils, and then get breeds. And this will be our test if there aren't any typos or mistakes inside of here. Let's go do that right. And we should see that show up here. One thing for safety we should do also is this data directory might not actually exist on the server too. So one thing we'll do is call fs.write or make dir. And if you're familiar with like bash commands, make dir is also the name of the bash command for making a directory. And we're going to make this directory from here. This is the directory that we want to make, is guarantee that this directory exists. And one flag we can throw into here too, if we add recursive into here, recursive, I'm hoping that, this is inside of an option. Now we have some options, and we can set recursive equals true. And that way, if it exists, it won't complain. Otherwise, if it already exists, then this also helps address making child directories, but that'll help. And we should guarantee that this happens before the write file. And so in both of these cases, we can await that output because both of this is synchronous and helps us. This is kind of the benefit of doing what we did up here to work through promises in order to look at this data. Okay, so we have a node script that we can invoke in order to populate this data. And so I'm just going to take this node script, put it into our package JSON, and say that there's a script available, and it's called, let's put this in quotes, node utils getBreeds.js. And then here's the trick that takes this and runs it on every execution. There's a couple ways there's a couple ways to attach this. Build could say, I want to npm run fetch and also run Eleventy. But we can make this a little more piecemeal too and run a pre-build script. And then on pre-build, every single time we build, we're going to go run npm run fetch. Cool. So it means if I run the build command, then I'm definitely going to run this command. And so the benefit of doing all of this is we can check in updates to breeds.json at any point in time. If we're running this locally, we see, hey, this stuff made some progress, it changed. If we ever do a build live on the server, as long as that server build command says, hey, go run a build here, it's always going to do a live fetch. That live fetch will happen before the build ever takes place. It will go put the latest version of breeds into here from whatever is available on the API, and then it will go build the site from there. So let's run that whole thing available. And so we can hit npm run build. It should hit all of our constituent parts here. It should write the full site. And then let's push this up live and then make sure it works live on that site. So we have some changes to breed. We're going to get to these naming things later. If anyone's curious, there's still time to drop it in the chat. We have our list view of breeds. We added node fetch to this package. This breeds is going to come with us. It's something we can commit. If we really didn't want to commit it, we could add it to the get ignore. We're always going to get it on our build server when we do that live fetch. That's then a question for you, whether you want to kind of allow Git to track that data over time. If it's a ton of data, the answer is probably no. That's a little too much. If it's data you care about, there's no reason why it's inappropriate for Git to track that. We removed our little data starter kit. We added breeds to here, and then we added our getBreeds method. So let's do this and say live data stage 3. And one thing I need to go do now is the build command that we were working with previously didn't we just added in build and pre-build today. So we need to go into our Netlify site and go into site settings and build and deploy and edit these settings. And right now the build command is just Eleventy. What I'd like it to do is npm run build. Rather than just running this piece, I'm just going to delegate that responsibility to whatever I put in the build script. Long term, that's a good practice anyway, because it means if I want to add some image manipulation steps, some other stuff ahead of time, we can change it to this source code, push it up, and then we don't have to touch the Netlify configuration for the site. Let's save this command. And then on deploys, we see this already deployed, but that didn't have the saved command available. So let's trigger a new deploy. We might see it. So if I refresh here, we should see breeds, and we should see each one of these breeds come in correctly. But we'll also, that's because we committed the file. Now we'll commit and also run live on the server and grab information. That's the latest version. Let's say cat API changed in the last 5 minutes since we built that last time, is the server should be running the latest version of this. And one place where you can start having that show up is if you have data that, I don't know release schedule or the periodicity that cat breed data updates. I would assume infrequently. But if you have data that changes regularly, daily stock prices, something like this, and you want to build a static site with them, you can just say, hey, go build every 5 minutes, go build every 15 minutes. Even at those frequencies, you're probably still under free tier for a lot of sites. And at worst case scenario, you're paying build minutes for something that runs pretty quickly, or at least depending on the complexity of your site. So we should see deploy details here. We can see the result of this is published. That is all up to date. We have 10 minutes left to poke around on Eleventy and do some more fun stuff if we want. But I also want to give people the opportunity to ask questions if they have questions. So please put them in the chat if there's anything you want to see here. And just to kind of spoil what I'd like to do is make a whole series out of this. If there's something you want to, we can hodgepodge together a site that has multiple pages, has some data. We can put some SVGs in here, some icons, some images, whatever you think, whatever you're trying to accomplish on your own Eleventy site, let's put it into here, or just trying to accomplish in web dev. Let's throw that use case at Eleventy and see how to accomplish this. So I hope, to put the sales pitch, 10 minutes before close, I hope you got something out of this. But also, if there's something else you want to see, in a month, we'll have another JS Marathon, and we can absolutely include other content and other strategies into how we build this site. So poke at questions. I'll keep my eyes on chat if anybody has any questions. And let's throw some more stuff at this while we have a little bit of time. One thing, and this is covered in the Eleventy docs, but I want to do on pretty much every site I have, and let's just see if we can do this in the last couple minutes here, is they have quick tips. And right now, when we look at the network traffic for our site, let's get rid of this. Let's go to the network panel. Eleventy sites, just out of the box, are pretty darn quick because this is partly static sites, and partly that there's just nothing injected into the site that's overhead at all, other than the HTML that you want. And so we get a really clean network graph, but we always have in this waterfall, we have like some sites that are happening, the styles are happening after the fact. And for this many styles, if we're kind of writing bespoke styles for our own site and we don't have a library that we need to reference, and we just want to pull in at least these styles to get us up and started, we can include those into the build of the site with a couple different swaps on the back end. So let's go through how to inline minify CSS. And this guide is entirely sufficient to be able to do that. But let's just showcase some of the steps in here and being able to do them. One thing we'll need to get is an ability to minify CSS using the Node ecosystem. We're not quite as sophisticated as throwing Webpack or some big build pipeline into here, but there's a JavaScript module that, given some JS input or given some string input, we can convert that into a minified version of CSS. It's important to note, too, that this is happening at build time. Users will never have to pay the price of seeing this happen. We're going to minify all our CSS ahead of time. So let's grab this install and put it into here. We can stop this from running really quickly and throw install clean -css here. Awesome, that's available. And one of the things we did last time is also create our Eleventy config file. There's in the Eleventy docs, there's a big section on all the stuff that you can do out of a config file. The thing we did last time was add pass-through copy of everything in our assets directory to export that into our site and get assets into here. Other things you can do is, in the same way that we had looked at default layout and we have a filter like safe, or we had the filter of dump that came, both of which came with nunjucks, we can create our own custom filters to say, hey, also, I'm going to pass you whatever data is available here, and then I want you to run it through this filter. And that's one vehicle by which we can take set of CSS that's in a string and then zip it up and minify it and inject it straight into our site. And so if we look at the docs here, here's kind of the method for doing it. You'll notice we're in our Eleventy config file, and we're going to add a filter called CSS min. So I will do that here. Add filter. Cool. That takes advantage of this Eleventy config object passed into here. I need to grab this module, and I can put it at the top. And this is available because we npm installed it. Okay. And anything in the includes directory is something that is available for us to inject. And so the site.css that we have right now, we're doing pass-through file copy on that. I'm actually going to take this off. We can actually leave it for if we had images, we might, we're not going to include them in the same way. We want to just reference them as external files. But I will take and at the root directory create a _includes folder. Oh, I already have one. Yeah, so layout is an example of the type of thing that is includable. And let's just move site.css into here. And then when we look at our default layout, rather than bringing this in as a style sheet, we're going to go through this. This is a nunjux convention where we can set a value, a property like CSS, include anything from the includes folder, especially if that's string based. And so we will capture all the CSS content inside of a nunjux variable. And that variable name will be CSS. And then we'll run it through the filter that we just created, named CSS min, and then also call it safe because there's some stuff that looks like markup. We don't want it to sanitize any of that. And so we can just grab all of this, save it into here, and let's npm run serve. Oh, all right, let's debug some stuff together. Group. Okay. Template not found, sample.css. That's totally fair. We called it something else. So we're going to go site.css is what we're looking to include into here. And let's run this again. Okay, cool. By the way, we didn't have to minify this. So just by moving site.css into includes, if we just didn't do this filter, we could have inlined it anyway, even without the minification. The minification isn't buying us too much here. The thing that I really like is being able to inline it into the one document. We have one request for our entire page. It's rendered immediately. So let's go back to our local host of this and refresh. And we see some stuff on the network traffic related to browser sync. But our actual page is only making one network request. And you can see this from the preview. It has all the data that it needs to actually be a page. So that's another use case we can throw at Eleventy to bring performance and bring immediate styling to pages in a relatively easy way, easy and straightforward. I'd like to think it's not that many steps, but I'd like to also think that the steps make sense in the context of what we're doing. With that, want to thank everyone for joining me. I look forward to any comments that you might have for future series. And let's just quickly go back to our last little highlight is when we have information here. This should be a definition list. This should be a definition term, and this should be a definition description. So there's some HTML funness for everyone to end off the day. That's what I got.
Thank you so much, Kyle. That was an awesome session. You can check out Kyle's next session today. You do not have to wait. He will be back 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. Kyle, do you want to talk a little bit about your next session?
Yeah, sure. So not on Eleventy stuff, but One of the other projects we're doing here, I come from a background of doing a lot of ASP.NET development, and here we do a lot of JavaScript on the back end. And so one framework for doing that is called Nest.js, and kind of talking about my transition between the two of those and comparing and contrasting the syntaxes to be able to run a backend server, moving from C# to TypeScript, and framework to framework. So if you want to join me for that, be a totally different talk, but be on later on today doing that too.
Sounds great. Kyle, thank you so much. We are back 12:30, 3:30, depending on your time zone, with Simone Cuomo. He is doing a Vue 3
awesome.
migration session. Yes, very much looking forward to that. And Kyle, we will see you at the end of our marathon. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments box or get a hold of Kyle on Twitter. And we'll see y'all soon. Have a great day.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.